guys, welcome to another BigLipz podcast. This is season 2, episode 11. Basically, for those who don't know, my name's Catherine Reese, joined as ever by my good friend Sam Macaulay Blair. We are basically two former and current film students. We started season 1 of the podcast all the way over a year ago now, discussing movies. And then once we hit a year, we kind of transitioned into talking about TV. So the way that it works is every month you have a kind of content and then concept episode. We've just finished Sam's concept episode, so we are moving on to content. And this week we are going to be talking about a show that we've kind of poked fun at throughout the entire TV series. And I feel like it's going to be really hard to keep this one under wraps and keep it under like 4 hours, so we'll try our best. But of course this week we are going to be discussing The Walking Dead. Obviously, for those who don't know, I don't know who you are, but this is I think it's been on several different networks, but yeah, basically it's on season 11 now, I think, the last season.
You're more likely to know than I am.
Yeah, and there are 11 hefty seasons, and as far as I know, there's like at least 2 or 3 different spin-offs as well, which is pretty impressive considering it started from like a graphic novel series. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. So first things first, Sam, obviously, just a quick disclaimer, neither of us have seen up to date, basically. I think I've seen slightly further than you, Sam, but I assume, and from my notes anyway, there's going to be spoilers galore. So, I mean, in fairness, when the show started like a while ago, so if you're still getting spoilers now, then that's on you.
Yeah, I was in school when I started watching it, and the show had already like been out for a bit then.
Yeah, so we're a good chunk of time in, so apologies if you are raging by spoilers, but again, that's on you. So yeah, Sam, I wanted to just start on your kind of overall thoughts, whether you enjoyed it, didn't like it, how long you stuck with it, if you're still watching it, would you recommend?
Anyway, I feel like my answer here is going to come as no surprise, but I would, just before going into answering that, and obviously for the discussion that follows, I would like to ask you, what is your opinion on, I think we discussed this before actually, what is your opinion on like zombie media?
It's not something that I would seek out, if I'm honest. I feel like you would kind of put that under the umbrella of like horror, and I feel like there's just so much more that I would rather watch than zombies. I feel like they're we have spoken about this before, because I remember our discussion that they're very limited in like what they do. They're not if a zombie came in the room just now, it would be very scary, but in TV they're not massively scary. They don't tend to evolve in any way. They're just reanimated corpses, so they're not like the scary thing is that they get
worse over time, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I get that the whole kind of scariness is that they never stop and they're constantly coming, but I'm like, but you can still drive a car. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. If you drive a car away from the zombies, that gives you plenty of time to stop and rest for 8 hours and then get back on your day. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like
get the full 8 hours in as well. It's not even like an asana. Like, you actually will get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like there's a lot bigger threats out there in kind of TV in general. So yeah, you're in a similar kind of boat, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I've always found them like so uninteresting in terms of like, I think maybe when I was like very young, and I hadn't really seen much in the way of like zombie media, I was like, oh yeah, they're kind of cool. But like it doesn't take long before you've seen like all the zombie stories, or it feels anyway like you've seen all the zombie stories. And I find it very hard to get excited by zombie related media. Obviously there are, there's some great like zombie related fiction out there. And I think it's always more interesting when they try something a bit new. I know the video game, we've obviously discussed video games before. The video game series, The Last of Us, is probably one of, if not the best, like zombies, like pair of zombie stories in my eyes, and they're not even like proper zombies. It's like mutated fungus, which does exist in real life. Like, I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's this like infection that basically like grows on top of like living things, and I think pretty much kills them, but also like kind of takes over them and makes them really hostile. And obviously the longer, it's called like cordyceps, I think. And the longer, obviously, like the longer it has like sort of control over like its host, the more like sort of mutated and kind of horrible it becomes. So it's quite an interesting premise of like doing a zombie related story, The Last of Us, because you have like different evolutions, and the actual like storytelling at the start of it, at the center of it, rather, the heart of it, is really, really good. It's really like the character writing stuff, the story is absolutely fantastic. But yeah, generally, like you said, like they're kind of slow moving, like sort of ambling things. And I know obviously you have like that is something that is a staple of horror that exists with like zombies. You have like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and stuff. They all kind of play to that sort of same, I guess, fear, where it's like this slow moving thing that will always catch up with you. But with them, you have like an intelligence. That's, I think, where a lot of the fear comes from. That it's not just the fact that these things, those beings are like strong and hulking, and if they catch you, you're kind of dead. It's also the fact that they do kind of go out of their way to show that like these like villains will like outsmart you, whereas like you're not getting outsmarted by the zombies. And I think that's the thing. I think that always kind of ruins it, doesn't it? Like The Walking Dead definitely like falls victim to this, where like a lot of times characters are killed off because like they'll be talking to someone else and they'll like walk in a room and a zombie just like jumps at them. It always has to be like a complete accident. Like it's not, the zombie 100%. Isn't waiting. The zombies, as surprised as they are, it just like
100%. Like it just seizes its chance. And I feel like The Walking Dead makes quite a point to show how stupid the zombies are, because they're constantly getting caught in traps, and you see them like it's impaled on spikes and things like that, and they're just still trying to amble on. Like it's
and I feel like I mean, I've basically answered your question without answering your question. Obviously not a big fan of The Walking Dead, but yeah, I feel like you say, they do go out of their way to sort of show you that. And I also feel like the zombie writing is really inconsistent. Like like sometimes they'll be kind of stronger and a little bit like sneakier than normal, and then other times they're just like slow moving, and I feel like there's just not, they kind of like change the rules. There's not many rules with zombies to begin with, but I do feel like they kind of change the rules when it sort of suits.
100%. I think The Walking Dead's really bad as well for the zombies are quiet when it when it helps the story. Do you know what I mean? Like, but they're like we were just saying, they're zombies. They have no brain functions. It wouldn't occur to them to be quiet, to like dupe people into the room that they're in. And we see multiple times zombies who are like alone basically, but they're still moving about and they're still like groaning and things like that. Why do the zombies that are hiding in a room, why are they quiet? It's very inconsistent.
Exactly. And I think, and obviously The Walking Dead did go through a series of showrunners, and the writing staff did change, and you can kind of see that in like the quality. And it's interesting actually, just like, because you were talking about how successful it is. I mean, it wasn't massively to begin with, which I think is quite interesting. And it kind of began, I can't remember the exact year it started in, but it kind of began, I think, maybe just before the likes of Game of Thrones took off and like properly changed TV. And again, we discussed this actually last time, and obviously how like they then had like big budget shows, and I think that's why like season 1 had a lot of money pumped into it, but just had 6 episodes, and I think had Frank Darabont behind it, who did Shawshank Redemption. So it was a big, talented group, and told quite a sort of nice contained story, with obviously like scope for continuation. And then season 2, they did a longer season, but also stripped back a lot of the money, and Frank Darabont was gone. They brought new people in, and that's why it's like all set on a farm, like controversially, which obviously people understandably were not a big fan of. I think when you binge it, it helps that series a lot, because I can't imagine how like difficult it must have been to stick with the show week after week. But yeah, it's kind of, that is one thing I'll give it. It is impressive that it's become like this behemoth, and that it's still going, and that it has these spin-offs, because like looking at the start of it, it's funny to see how like sort of like small scale and how how much it was sort of fighting for survival itself. But yeah, no, I like it basically confirmed most of like my like feelings on zombie things.
Yep.
And I think I stuck with it until like not even because they do like mid-season cliffhangers, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't think I even like made it to the mid-season cliffhanger of mid-season finale of season 5. I remember starting to watch it and then like I kind of forgot to watch it one week, and then I was aware that I was like falling behind, and I was like, oh, I'll make the effort. And months later, I was like kind of trying to catch up on it, and I'd get like halfway through an episode and then do something else, and it just never. It was just one of those things that more and more time was passing, and I just had like less and less of a compulsion to go back and watch it. And then I think when season 7 started, which there was like obviously a lot of hype around that. That was the whole Negan thing, like cliffhanger there, and yeah, I was like, okay, well, I might try getting on like back on board The Walking Dead here. I think I watched the start of the episode. I don't think like couldn't even like really be bothered watching that first episode all the way through. And I think I was just like, yeah, like I just maybe I'll have the compulsion to go back and watch it someday. And like the more I think about it, the more I look at it, the more I'm just like, yeah, I'm so glad I walked away.
Yeah,
I was watching like a quick recap. Yeah, I was watching a quick recap on the show before like this podcast just to sort of refresh some stuff. And I just, even then there was like, you think back to like shows that you like, and there's all these moments where you're like, oh, I remember watching that the first time. It was really heavy hitting and really powerful, and I remember living that moment. Yeah, that happened. That was a thing.
Yeah.
And it was like the odd moment where I was like, yeah, I remember kind of being into that, but now that I'm like in the overall context, it's pretty dumb. So yeah, there's my long and rambling thoughts on the show. Catherine,
Well,
what about yourself?
I have very similar long and rambling thoughts on the show. Overall, my overall thoughts are negative for The Walking Dead. I think it's one of my notes is that it's monotonous in the extreme, and like it's somehow monotonous each episode and on the series as a whole. So like
exactly what you mean as well.
Yeah, like each episode is boring, and then each season is boring, but it works. You have to suffer through all of this boredom for a little bit of excitement, and then straight back to boredom and monotony again. And don't get me wrong, there are moments that are good, but like you say, they're good while you're watching them, and then like later on we'll discuss different story points and things like that. And I was struggling when I was thinking about it. That way, any other show you can be like, oh yeah, like exactly like you were saying, like that episode was great, or like we were talking about Grey's Anatomy once, oh yeah, the bomb episode or whatever.
Yeah,
I feel like there's not a huge amount of that in The Walking Dead, which is they definitely suffer from especially after the first couple of seasons, well, no, even into the second season if you're talking about the farm. So they find somewhere safe, they're safe for a while, plodding along, occasional zombie comes by, and then some kind of threat appears and they have to leave their safe place, and then they suddenly find another safe place, and that continues for seasons. It happened on the farm, it happened in the prison, it happened at Alexandria or whatever. So yeah, that seems to be how like new writers have come in and been like, that's conflict.
even Terminus, arguably that happened a lot quicker because they just get there and the place is already like evil, so they're just like, oh well, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
that's I mean, that was the one time where it's like, I'm glad that happened because it just like that was going to happen anyway, so I'm glad we got to that as soon as it arrived.
We like cut out the middleman. Love it.
Yeah, exactly. The one time that the show up the pace.
Exactly. I think there's definitely and I'm assuming we'll kind of get into this later on, I think there's points of the show that are just laughable, and that's not what you want in a serious show. Do you know what I mean? And there's no like, there's some kind of like intended humor, but it's few and far between. So it almost like makes the laughable parts even more laughable, if you know what I mean, because that's the only time you remember laughing. I think is the last thing I wanted to say is, as it goes on, it kind of, and this is must be one of the disadvantages to have zombies as your main plot point, is that it gets less and less about the zombies. Like now they're just like a kind of minor inconvenience, which I suppose would kind of happen. But yeah,
they,
I'm like,
they probably should have renamed it and The Walking Dead.
yeah, 100%. And they do that thing that really infuriates me. But I think like it happens a lot in these kind of shows where if people just work together, I know I sound like Mother Earth, but if people just work together, everyone would survive the zombies. But in this show, like, oh no, we've got this villain and then this villain and then this villain. That's part of the repetition of the show. We have to have a series villain. Yeah, so that does kind of annoy me, especially like, and I don't know why it annoys me, because like we were saying, I'm not massively into zombies, so I don't know why I care that the zombies are less and less as the series goes on.
It's like I said, it's the title of the show. Like, if you're going to call it The Walking Dead, then you would think that you would have something interesting to do with The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Like,
but that peaks after season 2, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like that's it. Like, just very, very quickly ran out of like ideas of what they can do with zombies, which is a shame, because like it would have been cool. So we talked about this before with like just a weird sort of tangents drawn, but we talked about this before with like The Simpsons and how that would be more arguably more interesting just now if they had like even slowly aged up the characters.
Yeah.
And if maybe they'd done something similar with the zombies, where they'd maybe like, again, I was talking about The Last of Us and the cordyceps and stuff, and how there's like they mutate and they kind of like become almost like different subspecies as they do. You know, doing something like that with the zombies where they actually become different creatures. And again, you know, I've not seen all The Walking Dead, but even like having other animals as zombies and maybe like the dangers there.
We've never, or I've never really come across any kind of like zombie dog or a zombie horse or something. Do you know what I mean? Or what if the zombies evolved so that they were like riding the zombie horses? So that it was like a little bit like Game of Thrones with they're called walkers as well, aren't they?
Yeah, true, the White Walkers. Not affiliated with them.
Yeah. But no, I 100% agree.
Yeah, because even that would be a way to make it more interesting when they're going to different places. Like you say, there's such like an obvious and predictable and just uninteresting pattern that develops, where it's just it just recycles the same basic plot and like there's not even really stuff that happens in between to stop you from noticing that it's the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. And if you've watched one movie before, you know what's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? It like follows this arc perfectly. I think I was just thinking there about the zombies mutating. I think they did it once when it came out that you didn't have to be bitten to turn into a zombie. So that was like, but that was in like season 2. So, and they're now on season 11, I think. And as far as we know, they haven't done any other kind of mutation on them, which I think is very telling and on brand.
Yeah, exactly. And that just it would have just been like an idea. Like it would have just like, and even even maybe having like, because again, I don't think they even really focus on like different places they go, and I guess this is maybe part of the problem with it being America, and America's not even all that same either.
Yeah,
that you could go somewhere like, I don't know, like to sort of like swamplands and stuff, and you could have like interesting stuff going on there with like zombie gators and stuff like that, and you could genuinely have like interesting stuff going on where like maybe the danger, there actually is some like external zombie danger that they haven't come up against before, and that's kind of the problem. There's so many like interesting things. I mean, I say so many, there's not, I don't have a lot
there's
of
at least 3
zombie fiction, because I don't think there's exactly. But the point is there's more than like The Walking Dead has done in as many seasons.
100%. But no, that was interesting. Thank you. Before we continue, just continue rambling on about Walking Dead. We'll do it in more of a structured fashion. So basically, the idea of the next part is that we kind of have chosen different elements of the show, and then we're going to break it down in there. So the first one I wanted to talk about was cinematography. So for me, anyway, that would include anything from how it's shot, the kind of style of it, lighting, different special effects, green screen, shot composition, anything like that. So Yeah, Sam, what were your thoughts? Do you think it's a cinematic masterpiece?
God, this is the thing that obviously you asked. I knew that you were going to ask that question, and before even like going back and watching like a sort of like series sort of recap, I was struggling to think of any like of the cinematography standing. And granted, I watched it, before I was started watching it before I was like a film student in any way. But even then, there are movies that I watched when I was younger where I was like aware of the cinematography in a good way, and I was like, this is really well shot, this is really interesting. And with The Walking Dead, like I always just kind of felt that it looked very functional, very sort of bland, as a very sort of muted palette, and that makes sense. Like the color palette sort of being muted, but also when you're watching a show as long as that and as dull as it for the most part, it doesn't really help its case. And I think, I genuinely struggle to think of any like sort of standout shots. I know there's obviously the one that they put on the poster where he's like Rick's on the horse going towards Atlanta.
Oh yeah, but again,
I feel like I can't even really give that credit. Yeah, exactly. I feel like I can't even really give that credit because it's on the poster, so it kind of feels like it was a very like organized, and it probably was in the comic book. Without having, again, that's the thing as well. It's based on a comic book. You would think there'd be some like really interesting
really
like
cool,
stylistic choices. Yeah, and again, like obviously we discussed the fact that like the show's gone through multiple showrunners and different writers and stuff. You would think that like it changing hands, like look at the Harry Potter films, and obviously they had different directors come on, and there is a consistency to those films and to that world, but at the same time there's also like they varied it up. The movies look very different from one another. There's different sort of feel and style to all of them, and that I think really helped like the success of the franchise. I think if Christopher Columbus had stayed with the franchise, I think it would have like waned a little bit. And I think The Walking Dead could have benefited from that. It's kind of amazing that and all the times it changed hands, no one came in and was like, "I'm going to do something interesting with this show."
Yeah, exactly.
And I think again, sorry, I think like there is lighting wise, there's definitely some moments again where there's probably some nice lighting. Again, it's going to happen when you have character war where they're like in the sort of bunker or the sort of shipping container thing, and they decide to obviously they're going to make a stand against the people of Terminus, whatever it is. I think the lighting there was quite good because obviously it's like a big dramatic moment and they're like captured, but again it's kind of gonna be I feel like I can't even really throw the show that much of a bone because it's like that's like the good end of the lighting, but even then I can't like distinctly remember it. I don't remember watching it and being like, oh, that's a really nice shot. So yeah, in terms of cinematography, like impressively unimpressive, I'd say.
Yeah, 100%. I have kind of written that in my notes as well. Like I was thinking about shot composition, and again there was nothing that I could think of that even stood out slightly. Do you know what I mean? What did stand out though, and this lasted up until at least season 3 or 4, was just how visually noisy the show is. Like it's painful to watch. Like obviously like visual noises, like when things are shot at kind of low light or the ISO isn't high enough on the camera, so it's grainy. And the entire first 3 to 4 seasons were noticeably grainy, like to the point where it was almost unwatchable. Like the zoom quality we've got just now is about on par with what The Walking Dead looked like, and it just infuriates me because how early on in our course did we learn that about noise and about light and how that affects your camera? Do you know what I mean? And we were students. And I feel like you're saying, if the first season was pumped full of money, do you know what I mean? It just infuriates me because I was like, why is no one checking that? Why is no one watching rushes or anything like that to see that it's very, very noisy?
It's weirdly not talked about as well, I feel.
I don't know how. It would just like it 100% took away from what little experience there was. to the point where I just couldn't concentrate. I was watching it and I was like, look how noisy that is. So yeah, I can't say that I've noticed it as much in the latter seasons. So at least they got someone in that could work a camera after 3 to 4 seasons. So that was good. Yeah, another thing I wanted to talk about was, particularly in season 2, I don't know if you remember this, but there were some shots that were so glaringly green screen that it was hilarious. And again, it was so jarring because we did very minimal training on like green screens and things, but we did it and it was fine. Do you know what I mean? And again, this is the thing where I was watching it and I was like, that couldn't be any more green screen if it tried. And I was like, but why are you doing that? Because clearly you've shot on a farm previously. Like, did you lose permission to shoot there? Like, I don't know what happened. You run out of money?
Must have been reshoots, I would think.
It could have been, yeah. That's a good shout.
I don't remember noticing it, but I think it literally was 10 years ago that I watched season 2.
So that's
same with like the noise thing. So I was definitely like less attuned to these things. But like there's definitely, I mean, there's one moment in particular in the show that I think is in season 7. I haven't seen the episode in question. But I remember, I think my then girlfriend was watching the show and came around and basically like was telling me about this clip. So we got it up on YouTube, and I genuinely like, that was like kind of my last impression of the show. And it just before like this podcast, I was like, right, I'm going to rewatch the clip and see if it's as bad as I remember it being. Because there's basically a scene in, I think it's season 7, where Rick sees a deer.
Oh no.
Do you know the scene I'm talking about?
Yes.
And it is the worst CGI that I have. I remember at the time going, that can't be a real clip. And that was my like impression of it. And I opened it up, obviously, before this podcast, thinking, okay, I'm going to give it a second chance. Maybe like, genuinely, maybe I was, because I don't think I was sober as well when I was showing the clips. I was like, maybe I was unfair on it. I was like, I'll watch it now, clear mind. I'll give it like a full chance. And oh my God, is it bad?
Yeah. Have you not seen
about it again?
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, talking about things that we could do better. I have no animation skills whatsoever, and I am confident that I could animate a better deer.
That's amazing.
Than the one that's in that episode of the show.
Paired very well with the CGI tiger. Have you seen it? It's a CGI masterpiece in keeping with the deer. No. It's not quite as bad as the deer, but it's very glaringly CGI. And fair enough if you didn't want to bring a real tiger in, but do you know what I mean? Like, a wee bit more effort, please. One last
it would have made the show a lot more interesting if they'd filmed it with. Sorry. I was just going to say, it would have been way more interesting if they'd filmed with a real tiger on set.
Yeah, exactly. That would have given me some excitement. But no, the last thing I kind of wanted to mention in this section was makeup. And it's not maybe not cinematography, but I feel like one thing they did do very well is their practical makeup. I think the zombie makeup and has always been very good, and they tend to lean towards practical as opposed to CGI, which after we've seen the deer is a good thing. And I think it's like, I think it works because it's super, super gory. One thing that does annoy me is whenever they're biting into someone, everyone's skin seems to be super, super stretchy. Have you noticed? Like a zombie would bite their arm and then they would pull away and the bit of flesh would be coming like this. I'm like, you're not that stretchy. It would just come off.
Exactly. Like, yeah. I know, like, I've never been bitten in the arm by a zombie, but at the same time, I have had cuts where, like, obviously the skin is still attached, and it doesn't just like, it's not like elastic. Yeah,
like even if you pulled your skin like that, it doesn't come away up to here.
Exactly. It does. Yeah, it does very much have limits.
But
no, I agree about the sorry.
No, fine.
I agree about I think one thing that I remember reading about, even as early as like I think season 3, and I assume they continue doing it, is they have made an effort to like further like decay the zombies so that they are actually like breaking down more as time passes, which I think is just a really cool detail.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's 100% like potentially the strongest part of the show is the zombie makeup. So they do, credit needs to be given for that because it is amazing. And it's so gory, but not in like a kind of torture porn kind of way where it's watchable, but it does make you cringe, which I think is exactly what you want in something like that, especially a TV show that's so long running. If it was really excessively gory, I feel like you just couldn't stomach watching it after a certain time. So yeah, I feel like it does a good job on the. So in conclusion, one thing it does well. So yeah, next we're gonna move on to talking about the characters of the show. So Sam, we I think are gonna start with if you had any favorite characters, why you like them, if you thought they were badass, fire away.
So yeah, like with regards to my favorite characters, and I almost use the word loosely.
Yep.
No, I mean I do. There's definitely characters that I prefer more. I think
high
in
praise.
the time that I watched it. And the time that I watched it, I remember like I'll start with he's obviously the most important central character, so I'll start with him first. Rick is kind of an interesting one in the sense that he goes from he swings between being interesting and not.
Yep.
And I think sometimes
consistently
sweaty
like, though. Have you noticed?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point actually.
It's like, you know how when they make fun of Jack in Lost and how he's always panting and sweaty. Rick is always panting and sweaty, and his hair obviously grows, so it starts getting quite curly, and then the sweat just like collects in his little curls. Yeah. Needless. No one else is sweating like that.
It was a naughty's leading man thing, I assume.
Yeah.
You had to be there at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like it. Yeah, like sometimes they do some interesting stuff with him, and I, I appreciate that, and I like him. And again, it even took like a very long time before that happened. He is just kind of used as like the moral like epicenter, and then they kind of make him a bit more like conflicted, I guess, after a while, which is like kind of interesting, and he kind of gets like a slight darker edge to him and stuff. But even then, like, I also did like, obviously she's a fan favorite, but I did really like Carol and what they did with her. Like I feel like she had like by far, and I also think again, I feel like every time I say I have something nice to say about the show, I end up like taking away from the show. But I do feel like that was very much accidental. Like I don't think day one they were like, oh, like we got big plans for Carol. She's we're going to develop her in interesting ways. I think it was more, again, I think it was part of the fact that, I think that was one of the advantages to it obviously changing hands, is I think it was an idea that someone else had coming on, maybe as they were like, there's this character that's, that's had this sort of like traumatic sort of backstory. And
oh, maybe.
Tons about what happens beyond what I've seen. I know like bits and pieces. I've watched like the odd video kind of discussing some stuff and read the odd thing, but I haven't done like an actual like followed the narrative. Not even watched like a Walking Dead summed up thing because I just really don't care. But I remember thinking at the start of season 5, Carol's been really well developed. They've done some interesting stuff with her, but I also feel like she's probably not going to develop
any further
that much more now, I feel like. And I think this is like one of the main issues the show has, is it becomes very obvious when like are suddenly like plot like death proof. Obviously I watched I think season 3 to season 5 when I gave up with it live for the most part. So I was, and there was points where I was like really in on like the online discussions and speculations and stuff. I had friends that were really into it, so we would like discuss what we thought was going to happen, where we thought it would go, and that sort of thing. But it very much did feel like, okay, there are characters that are just are untouchable because they're very, very like widely loved.
Yeah.
And I think the Walking Dead, as we discussed, its rating isn't nearly as good as or even like maybe as it thinks it is. And so for the show to develop genuinely like interesting characters and well-loved characters, it does feel like almost like a lightning in a bottle type thing, where they're just like, well, we don't really know how we did that, but we've somehow done it. So they're like, then they're then too scared to kill them off, because they're like, well, we lose this character, we've not really got anything
we don't have a backup
that can replace them. They're just kind of gone. So yeah, I think Rick's obviously an obvious one that's just kind of like, you know he's gonna be in it for the long haul. Carl was another one. Daryl was another one. I mean, there was literally like, what was it? If Daryl dies, we riot. Like the big groups that were going around for a long time.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the two of them are probably like my most the characters that I've cared the most about. And then Michonne, I also did like. I remember being like quite interested in her. Don't have like tons to say about her. I just think, I was like, she's a cool character. I appreciate her.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would 100% agree, not with Rick, but with Carol would be, I would say, my fave. I think because of her 360, although I'm sure you'll remember, as I started to watch it, I was messaging you about how much I hated her because she was a terrible mum. And I stand by that, because she was a terrible mum. And her daughter went missing.
The show pretty much goes out of its way to prove that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I'm like, her daughter went missing, and literally she couldn't care less. 5 minutes after she went missing, Carol was just moving on with her life. Rick was far more crushed by that than Carol was. But once you got over the fact that she's a terrible mum, she has some of the moments that are like, wow, that was cool. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, go you, Carol. And I think they were obviously made better, like we're talking about, because of the way that she started. She was very obviously like a victim and things like that. So yeah, her 360 shift was cool, was fun to watch. I also liked as well that she just
can I ask sorry, how far, because I did realize I meant to ask this before but never did, how far through are you, and if it's considerably further ahead than season 5, has Carol developed any more since the start of season 5?
Well, I'm now about 8 episodes into season 8.
Okay.
And funnily enough, Carol went through this. So she's terrible mum, she's badass, and then she went through this weird stage. Do you remember Morgan, the guy that Rick met at the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah,
so he comes,
so he comes back and he's very moral, and it's really taxing to watch. But it starts to rub off on Carol, who then starts to get really, she gets para about everything. She doesn't want to kill anyone, which I mean is fair enough, but if they're bad guys trying to kill you, then maybe you should just pick up a gun and go for it. You've done far worse up until now, Carol.
Yeah.
So she went through a weird dip where she kind of ran away from the group, and she was just living in this little cottage alone and sad and trying to read books and stuff. But from where we are, she's kind of coming back out of it, which I think they realised, God, no one is liking Carol like that. Everyone loved her because she was so badass. Which is nice that she's coming back out of it. But her Morgan was annoying because of that, because I'm like, yes, everyone wants to be moral, but there's a time and a place. Do you know what I mean? And when people are consistently trying to kill you and everyone you know and care about, then exceptions need to be made. I think I also agree with
absolutely.
I agree with your thinking on Michonne. I thought she was pretty cool. But that's probably where it ends. I did like her relationship with Carl. Like, they were just like friends, which I always thought was nice. What I didn't like was her relationship with Rick, because I also felt like they were friends. And then suddenly they were so in love and like had been in love for seasons. I didn't get it. I wasn't feeling it. Maybe that as it goes on,
I think
it becomes a bit better, but
yeah, I think there was like a really big, along with the if Daryl dies we riot, I think there was a really big like shipping thing, especially because like I think that was all kind of going on around like so at the peak of like Tumblr and
hello.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Last thing we caught was you were chatting about Tumblr. Tumblr was a big thing at the time.
Yeah, and like there was just a lot of like people shipping Michonne and Rick, and I don't even know if like them getting together happened when I was watching it. I don't think it did, or if it did, I forgot about it. But I think I remember hearing about it when it happened, and it was very much just like of course, like the fans kind of got what they wanted, because it was just like for literally years, it was just like always kind of discussed. So I think like it's one of those things that now binge watching it away from like all of that, it probably does seem really weird, but it was just like I guess it was such an inevitable thing when like the show was airing.
No, that's fair. I think another one I wanted to mention was Sasha. I feel like the show actually, one of the things it does quite well is having like, and I hate to use the term, but like badass women, but not in the insufferable way that they can sometimes be. Do you know what I mean? Like these are actually just, they know like the world as we know it has ended. There's zombies all about the place. We need to pick up a gun and get stuff done as well. And I feel like they do that really well. And I feel like they almost make a point, like obviously Maggie, everyone loves Maggie. And Carol and everything, they make a point of them being likable. And they're the very much the ones being badass. Like there's loads of situations when it's Carol that's got them out of situations and things like that, not any of the male characters really, which is quite interesting because it's especially with like a kind of obviously female leads in horror is really popular and it goes way back, but not so much maybe in kind of like drama or things like that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting point. And then weirdly enough, I wouldn't say he's my fave in any way, shape, or form, but I do quite enjoy when he's on screen as King Ezekiel because I feel like he's just a little bit of fun. Do you know did you meet him?
No, I don't think I met him.
No, he's the one with the tiger, with the CGI tiger.
Of course.
And the first time you see him, they're obviously talking about him and they're calling him the king and they're calling him King Ezekiel. And yes, you can have an audience with the king. And then I think it's Carol and she meets him and he's just sitting on this big stage with a tiger next to him. And he's so funny. Like his whole, like his character trait, or his character is that he like before everything, he was just a zookeeper. And then he managed to wrangle a tiger. And basically he just became what people needed him to be, which was this kind of like noble figure so that he could lead people. But he's one of the few like elements of the show that he's quite fun to watch. But other than that, there's not a huge amount to say about him. But yeah, I do always enjoy when he's on screen. And there was one point where I thought, yeah, there was one point where I thought they were going to kill him, and I was like almost mad. Like I wouldn't have cared massively, but I was almost mad. So moving on, are there characters that you don't like or that you wouldn't care if they died? Probably endless amounts, but are there any that stick out to you?
I mean, I genuinely like most of them, but God, I remember. I think I really didn't like Andrea. I think there was like a whole from like seasons 1 to 3.
Everyone hates her,
and I couldn't even really like tell you much. I couldn't even really tell you much about what like happened with her there. But I just remember like the name still just like sets off something in my brain. So I feel like I really like had a lot of hate for her, but I couldn't tell you why. So I'll say her. And I've never liked Daryl or Meryl. Like I've just never cared.
Apart from the fact that we Scottish people struggle to say their names. That's another issue. And then there's Rick's and Carl, which is which is even more difficult for us to say.
Exactly. I know, and Carol.
And Carol, yeah. So you've got Carol and Carl and Daryl and Merle. I don't even know how you would say it.
They don't do us any favors.
No, they don't.
Carl. Yeah, no, it's and they're just kind of like hillbilly-ish characters. They kind of have like some redemption, and that's kind of like, that was kind of like a surprise early on, and I feel like people, I don't know, I just don't really get it with them.
Yeah,
like
100%. I would go as far as saying that I don't like Daryl. I think he's boring in the extreme. I think he's, as a person, like if I was anywhere near him, I would not like him at all. I remember at one point when they first got to Alexandria, he like refused to shower for reasons unknown because he didn't want to settle in. Like, awake at a crypt, Daryl. Like, there's bigger fish to fry. Go for a shower.
I know. I guess, God, that really does say everything about the writing, doesn't it? That's like, what are we doing with Daryl this season? Well, we're going to give him an arc where he doesn't shower for a bit.
Yeah, and people consistently tell him to shower. So yeah, that was a thrilling season.
My God.
But yeah, I agree with you. I don't get the Daryl shipping thing. I love for Daryl. Sorry, I also don't get his use of weapon as a crossbow. Like, how ineffective. Do you know what I mean?
I know.
Like a bow and arrow would be more effective because you can at least load it quickly if you're trained.
Yeah,
I mean, I would have no idea how to load it, but
yeah, I know, but you're right. Like it's like a lazy bow and arrow, but at that point, it's like just use a gun. Like,
yeah, I don't get it. He's not. Oh no, I don't get it. I don't think like he does anything exciting.
I do feel like the crossbow is like his identity. Like that's like his personality. You meet people and it's like they've got like a certain hairstyle or something, and like that is their whole personality. Darrow's is like the crossbow is his personality.
Yeah, 100%. I remember he lost it for a while, and I was genuinely more concerned about the crossbow than Daryl. I was like, how are they going to get this crossbow back?
They're getting it back as well. They're not.
Oh yeah, yeah. There wasn't a question of if, it was how are they getting this back.
Oh dear, yeah. Even like I'm trying to think back to like the villains and stuff. Like I remember there being a lot of like love for the governor, and they do some interesting stuff with him. But even then, I kind of feel like that character was a bit like overused.
I think that's 100% an issue with the show. Is that so? One of my examples is Negan, and it's because he's been around for so long. It's almost like it diminishes the threat. Do you know what I mean? Like he's always going to be there in the background, so he's not that. He's like on par with the zombies on threat level, and they did that with the governor. They do it with all their villains, and it's yeah
exactly. They just, and again, it speaks to like the pacing of the show, and again the plot armor the characters have. You can tell within the show when like characters are just like they don't want to kill them and they're not going to kill them for a while. So it just diffuses a lot of the tension because you're just like, well, they're safe for like the foreseeable future. You want something that's genuinely unpredictable where like, and again, you would in theory have this if you had a better team of writers. You would have like more interesting characters that maybe turn up and are killed off quickly, and as a result, you then have maybe like higher stakes, and there are some, don't get me wrong, we meet some like groups and stuff. I think the whole Terminus thing was resolved like surprisingly fast and things like that. But I still feel like you can kind of tell with the show when like a character's there to stay and when they're meeting someone who's like a guest star basically. And it just doesn't do any favors. I think as a result, you kind of do just like you do just kind of want them to die, and you kind of want them to get on to the next thing because you're like, okay, well, I think with the governor as well. Like I remember, it kind of seemed like his whole like character in the end was just like he's a bit nuts.
100%. Yeah, they always just slip into madness, and that's just, it's not as interesting. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
it's kind of just like a free pass, isn't it? To just like they can just have him turn at a moment's notice, and it's supposed to be shocking, but it's like superficial shock rather than actually being like you know, again mentioned Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones does have a lot of really shocking moments, but they're always really well like orchestrated. You know, like Game of Thrones spoilers here, but like you look at the Red Wedding, and that's one of those things that like it's a shocking like moment, and it's really brutal, and obviously it relies on like a character that was basically established to be evil going back to being evil after being sort of like momentarily nice. But it's done in such a way that you're like, okay, that made a lot of sense. I get why they were acting that way, and why we sort of fell for the facade. Kind of like does a really good job of like cleverly tricking the audience because you want to believe it. You do kind of buy into it. And The Walking Dead just like feels like it thinks it's doing that kind of thing, but just isn't.
No, 100%. I think as well that could be like better source, well, not better source material, but we've spoken about like graphic novels before where there's so little like action and things like that, and it does, the writers have got a lot more work, whereas obviously Game of Thrones was very well established, very thick novels that they were working on. So yeah, but yeah, that again another issue with the writing. One last woman that I wanted to mention, who you wouldn't have met yet, and be glad that you haven't, because she's that way where she's not even like love to hate, she's just insufferable. I don't even know her name. She just lives in like the tip with her people, and for some reason she's got this crazy haircut where her fringe is like up to here, and she speaks like Yoda for some reason, like, you know how she speaks out of sequence, and I'm
you're gonna need to like send me clips of this person.
I'm guaranteed there'll be a compilation somewhere.
I need to see this.
I'll put it in the description because there'll be a compilation somewhere, I have no doubts. But I'm almost sure that she didn't originally speak like that, and then they've just adopted this, that what they must think is a cool character trait, and that's by far the most concerning part of the show so far. Like, why did they do that? And it's given off like weird cult vibes, which okay, that's fine, but surely, first of all, why would you agree to living in a dump, like a literal dump? How safe can it be from zombies? Safer than the hotel up the hill? Do you know what I mean?
They're not a problem anymore, are they? Like,
yeah,
there aren't the zombies like that.
Exactly. Oh God. I will. I'm just starting to ramble now, so we'll move on. But I will send you clips of her because she's.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do.
And you can.
And I mean, basically, the premise of this specific podcast is basically just an excuse for us to ramble. So. Pretty
much. So next thing I wanted to talk about was this one again is quite vague. So like the general, we've kind of touched on it at different points, but like the general story. How do you, like, we've spoken at length about the writing, but like are there points? I feel like it was a kind of interesting concept. I really like the idea that it starts right like in the middle of it, you don't know how it progressed and things like that. That's really interesting, but that's about all I can say about it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, no, I was, funny, as soon as you started on this like discussion point, my first thought was like, if you actually go back to like the premise of the show, it is such a good idea, that idea of like, so this guy's accidentally survived and he doesn't really know what's happened. And yeah, there is definitely like a cool show to be made about that. But like you say, just because, and even like he finds his wife and she's now hooked up with his best friend and stuff, but again, there's like interesting ideas. If you were to like talk to someone about the show who knew nothing about it, I feel like they would genuinely, you could tell them things and they would be like, wow, okay, yeah. Like there's so many, like there are things that just sound interesting and cool on paper, and then you start watching the show and you're like, wow, okay, there is like, that is it. Like those are like the tent poles, and they're very, very far apart and very little is going on in between. And I think there's just the odd moment. There was, I think season 4 had that whole storyline with like the girls, and it just became like Of Mice and Men basically, with Carol, And I remember that was an interesting because that was, like I said, I remember there was a point when I was sort of part of the speculation, and I remember I had a friend that was really into The Walking Dead, and we'd like were actively discussing like because it was like theorized for a while that the girls were like behind people being killed. I can't really remember what
oh yeah, the two girls. Oh right, now I know what you're talking about. Sorry, see that's like one of the big parts of the show, and I completely forgot about it.
But that was pretty much like I remember that being like an episode and being like, oh, that was good. That was nicely done. Like it felt like bold for like The Walking Dead. It felt like it was actually like pushing boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, because that was the one Carol had to go out and legit put a bullet in the back of one of their heads, and she was a child, like an actual child. That was one of the moments where I was like, "Ooh, yeah." But like you say, I had just completely forgotten about it.
Well, I mean, I mostly remember it because again, like it's obviously like a reference to Of Mice and Men, and there was a lot of memes about it at the time. But it was a really, really well done episode and a really, really well done moment. And again, of course, it features Carol, and it's a big part of like her development. And yeah, it was just it was actually like quite impactful stuff. But that's about it. I remember there being some moments where I was interested in what was maybe going to happen with the prison. But like again, like I feel like it's almost Stockholm syndrome with the show. Like
yes,
it's interesting when you're watching it because like you're just like, oh, thank God something is happening. And
then you would take anything happening just for a little bit of excitement.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you're not watching the show anymore and you look back on it, it's really hard to remember anything that happened, and B, even when you remember the good bits, you're kind of like, oh, is that it?
Yeah, that's such a good point because I didn't watch it at all. Well, it was airing, and I remember my dad used to watch it, and I used to just slag it off like relentlessly. So we've come full circle, and now I've watched it and slagging it off as well.
Props for consistency there.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the bit that I used to constantly slag him off about was early on when everyone was like, "Where's Sophia? Where's Sophia? Where's Sophia?" And at this point, they were on Herschel's farm, and they were like, "Ooh, there's a mysterious barn over there that's locked all the time." And I was like, "Oh, I wonder where Sophia could be." Like it was just painful. Yeah. So the rest of the show is like that. I think one of the moments I did enjoy is a weird word, but I thought was quite impactful was when Rick's wife Laurie died. I feel like that was it was made more exciting by the fact that it was potentially probably Shane's baby. And Shane by this point was dead. I feel like it was obviously in TV and film, that's a pretty horrifying moment when they like kill off a mum as she's giving birth. But this one they just like went the whole hog and intensified it in the fact that Carl had to shoot her and she asked him to do it. That was pretty horrifying. And he was like a literal child but at this point.
True.
And this is after poor Maggie had to cut the baby out of her. Like the whole thing was horrific. And then it got even worse. And Rick went to find her and a zombie had eaten her. This is when it just completely, like it was so good. It was doing so good. It was so heartfelt and there was actual real emotion there. And then Rick went to find her and there was a zombie slouched against the wall and he was bloated AF because he'd eaten the whole of Laurie. Like you completely ruined it. Good job.
Yeah.
Another thing that ruined it as well was I remember watching it and I was actually getting like properly into it and I was like, God, this is horrifyingly sad. And then it came out, it was, do you remember that meme that was everywhere of Rick? He was just looking at Carl. That moment happened and I was like, okay, well that's ruined that moment for me.
And it's funny, I never even considered that like as a consequence, but I did it because I watched that one. That was one of the ones I watched live. So when the meme happened afterwards, it was like, okay, I was on board with it. But yeah, I've never really considered the fact that the meme obviously is like so prominent that
like I'd seen it before and then it came up and I was like, oh, there's that meme. And it really took away from the moment, which was quite upsetting. But
Yeah.
That one point is no fault of, well, it's not as much a fault of Walking Dead. That's more just the internet at large.
Yeah. So the one thing The Walking Dead does well basically is like child trauma.
Yes, exactly. What more can you want? I think the one other bit that kind of almost stuck in my head, I'm not sure if you've seen it, was when Sasha like sacrificed herself to try and kill Negan when they were transporting her in that coffin.
Negan wasn't in it when I stopped watching it.
Lucky you. Well, basically Sasha was being transported in this coffin, and the whole episode was kind of like cutting between the action and then Sasha in the coffin, and she was looking at this iPod. It was like an iPod, not a nano, it was like the thicker one. I can't remember what one. That's not important anyway. And then basically the end, so Negan's taken her there to tease or to taunt Rick, to be like, oh, look who we've got. But he opens the coffin and Sasha has died and become a walker, so she attacks Negan. Of course nothing happens, he doesn't get bitten, because that would have been too exciting.
Yeah, it would be a nice poetic way for him to go, but no, of course
yeah not. But that episode was quite well done, the way that they did it. Obviously the whole time you thought that Sasha was still alive, and then it transpired that was a flashback. She'd taken a pill and died, and she chose to sacrifice herself for it.
Okay, nice.
But again, they had that nice moment, and then Negan didn't die. He got away scot-free. And then the stupid woman that lives in the tip, that was when she came in and backstabbed Rick. So yeah, so the whole it was doing so well, and then it just ruined itself
immediately.
Yeah, 100%. And it's because you've waited the entire time for it to be good, it feels like it's really good, like we were saying, and then something like that happens and you come crashing back down to like ground zero. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
On that note, are there any moments to point out that for you that were like laughable or particularly bad, or that you thought were really ridiculous? I mean, there's so many.
I think, to be honest, the ones that I remember, we've covered the main ones. I mean, the CG idea is like peak for me, and I didn't even watch that episode. But yeah, and genuinely, it is just a product of like, the show is so uninteresting that it's actually probably hard for me to remember now the points where like I would have thought, that was like laughably bad or that was awful.
Yep.
I think most of it has just been like scrubbed from my brain.
Yeah, which is fair.
What about yourself?
Honestly, I was trying to, obviously I wrote like the structure of the podcast before I started writing my notes. And as I was writing them, I was like, I don't have a huge amount to say here. Like, we've spent the entire podcast slagging it off, but I can't think of specific points. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's the thing, is like, it's almost sad because like it's not a great show, but it's just so uninteresting is like the worst thing about it. It's not even like, obviously we had we discussed Legion last time, and we discussed American Horror Story before, and on both those ones we were kind of like polarized, but we had things to talk about there. Like we had like a lot to discuss, and those are just like one season as well of those shows. Like, we're talking about a show where I've seen like 5 seasons of, you've seen 8 seasons of, and we're really struggling to talk about like and it kind of says it all. Like, it just is. The show is a waste of time.
100%. Speaking of, just quickly to wrap up, obviously this is the last season that we're on. Where do you think it's going to go, or how do you think it's going to end?
I think it's going to be one of those shows that doesn't end in any way like I actually don't know. I mean, I don't really know where it's at, but I feel like it's probably not going to end definitively because of like spin-offs and things like that. I feel like it's going to be one of those shows.
Oh yeah, after this they'll be announced suddenly like a Daryl show, like a Daryl spin-off.
Oh no, they have. There's a Daryl and Carol show, but I think Carol is now
Carol,
back.
I love it.
I think Carol's now backed out of it, so it's now just the Daryl show. So it's become even less interesting. I think there's like 3 movies that are being made with Andrew Lincoln, and I think there's obviously like various spin-offs, and they keep making Walking Dead games and stuff. So I think it's one of those things that it will probably have like it will like end its maybe the characters that are still in its story. It'll probably give them like a nice happy-ish ending. I imagine it will have like a sort of happy ending.
I imagine they'll chicken out of any kind of conflict or anything at the end, which I think would be the interesting way to do it.
Absolutely.
Like, I think if they finally decided that there was some kind of different mutation, so they think that they've gotten to grips with the zombies, and then suddenly there's some kind of horrible mutation where they're smarter, or do you know what I mean? Like, that would be such an interesting way to end it, so that you think, oh god, they're actually screwed.
Yeah, it would be really interesting if like they used because knowing there's going to be other spin-offs and stuff, like, I mean, I haven't seen Fear the Walking Dead. I don't know if there's any crossover with like The Walking Dead.
I couldn't tell.
It might be interesting if you had like, you know, the cast of another one of the Walking Dead shows turn up, and like you say, if you went down the brutal route, they come, you know, they bat heads, and like the main cast of The Walking Dead lose, because then it adds an interesting flavor to the spin-off, because you're like, okay, well, I don't really know how to feel about these characters anymore. It gives them sort of some complexity, but at the same time, you're like, okay, well, from their perspective, they didn't know these people, and there would have been friction there, and they are threats to each other. So I feel like the best thing it could do is embrace the fact that it's a continuing world, and actually do something interesting that makes you go, okay, I actually kind of want to watch one of those spin-offs now. But yeah, I don't think.
I don't think they will either.
And I don't think we're going to get like a cure or anything either.
I think it's very much going to end as it has ran. Do you know what I mean? Very boring. I have no doubts. So yeah, that seems like as good a place as any to stop. I feel like we could go on just bashing it, but you know, time's a wasting. But yeah, no, thank you very much, Sam, for joining me again.
Thank you.
Interesting discussion. As it's been a long time coming. So yeah, thank you again. Obviously next time it'll be I'll be hosting again. So yeah, I'll see you then in a couple of weeks. See you later.
Very well.